Hello and welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. I'm Ben Hansen, and MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. Today's interview guest is Jason Schreier. We talk about his new book, Press Reset, which I enjoyed quite a bit. A series of vignettes about the game industry, largely about studio closures, how to make the game industry more sustainable. It's a really interesting book, and it releases on May 11th this year, so you can check that out. In this interview, we talk about Jason's reporting, his career, his transition from Kotaku over to Bloomberg. If you enjoy this interview, we'd always appreciate it if you subscribe to MinnMax's YouTube channel, checked out the MinnMax Show podcast, which Jason was actually on the other week, or check out our other interviews as well. If you want to unlock the podcast version of this interview here, all of our other interviews, our future interviews, also the podcast versions of The Deepest Dive, our huge community game clubs on games like Final Fantasy VII, Last of Us Part 2, you can head over to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's and support us there to help support independent games media. Without further ado, here's Jason Schreier. Jason Schreier, welcome back to MinnMax, I guess we should say.
Hello. I hope that this show is as news making as the last one.
Do you get a thrill out of that?
No, I get kind of annoyed out of it. I used to be like, oh my God, this is so exciting. Like everything I say gets turned into headlines and stuff. But these days it's annoying because so much of it is just taken out of context. And I'm just like, oh, like there were headlines about The Last of Us 2 DLC, something I said about that. And I'm just kind of like, man, I was like offhandedly saying that in the middle of another sentence. Like, don't turn that into your friggin' headline. So yeah, it's just kind of annoying. I just wish people would listen to the entire interview or read the entire article instead of just like getting their sound bites out. But hey, it's the nature of the beast. So
and I'm sure it helps.
It gets you bothered.
Yeah, I'm sure it helps you kind of project into what developers experience every once in a while. Like, oh, just that one stupid thing taken out of context. I gave that demo 300 times, and one time I said this one thing. But it's gotta be. Yeah. It has to be bizarre. I mean, for you, when I don't know if you're aware of this, the name Jason Schreier has become a brand for scoops. And it's like, what? Jason Schreier said something? Let's put Jason Schreier in the headline, and then people will assume it's some hot, juicy scoop.
It's weird. It's definitely a weird thing, a weird evolution that's happened over the years. I mean, yeah, I can't really complain about it because it's like certainly helped me to build the brand and name for myself, but definitely a surreal experience.
Yeah. I still see rumors swirling about Knights of the Old Republic remake, and it always goes back to you. And like that one in particular, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm like, I think he just tweeted like if it was in development, it wouldn't be happening at EA. And now people are just linking back to that tweet, and it's become this weird circular logic where now I have like friends texting me like, hey, KOTOR remake, come and win. I'm like, I don't think that's happening as far as I know.
You are so devious. You're trying to get more news out of this.
Hang on, is there actually something there? I'm just assuming. I'm assuming it's all that old tweet.
Yes, there is something there. Yes, it's real.
Really? Okay, so here's the thing. It seems like a lot of people out there a lot of people have a lot of thoughts, but people are hell-bent to the idea that you enjoy spoiling things for people. Whereas, talking to you, and every once in a while you kind of message out there that like you don't want to just spoil things for the sake of spoiling them. You don't want to step on industry secrets, but when there's some logic and consumers should be in the know about how this is happening, then you want to reveal secrets. Is that the go-to here?
Yeah, I mean, I've gone back and forth on this, and my thoughts on this are very complicated, and I don't really have straight solutions for the question of like how much do you reveal, when do you reveal something, if you hear about something and you know it's true, like when do you talk about it. I used to be like a few years ago, like maybe 6-7 years ago, my mentality was a reporter should be reporting and a reporter shouldn't be keeping secrets. Like if a reporter finds something out, they should be reporting it.
Yeah.
And part of me still feels that way, but then the other part of me is like so empathetic towards people who have to deal with potential consequences for this stuff getting out and maybe feel bad about it. And it would be as cold as a reporter has to be sometimes. I don't think I could be so cold as to ignore the feelings of people who like might not be happy if something gets out. I think a large part of this is just like one of the reasons it's so I'm so conflicted about it, and it's also complicated, is because the video game industry is just so friggin' opaque. Yeah. And loves its secrecy so much that in any other field, you would just be like, oh yeah, we're working on that. We'll talk more about it when it's ready. The way that in movies, we know it's coming for the next 4 years. In books, like I announced my book years before it came out. I think that because the games industry, I mean, there are a variety of reasons for this opacity, but I think because it's so opaque and it's so much about those marketing beats and gets gamers in on the fun to the point where gamers get mad and fans get mad when you spoil a marketing reveal, which is pretty silly in my mind. It just creates this culture where like I have to think twice about saying that like Naughty Dog is working on a Last of Us remake, which is kind of silly in the grander scheme of things because they're working on a remake. Like who? Like
you say who cares? I mean, millions of people care. I mean, I'm one of those people.
No, not who cares. Not who cares. Who cares that it's like about the announcement itself? Like, see, like the thing that should matter is the thing. And I think that there's like a whole we could talk about this for a long time because I think this really plays into the announcement culture and the hype culture that surrounds video games. And one of the reasons that like it really bothers me actually that fans are so up in arms about spoiling marketing reveals is because in games we're treating these marketing reveals as if they're just as cool as playing games, and it's all very silly. And I've certainly played into it, like all of us have. We're all excited about the big E3 show, and like, what are they going to surprise us with this time?
It's fun, but Jason, like, and this is an entire industry based on fun. So
it's incredibly fun, but it's also a little unhealthy, and I think creates this culture where like games like Cyberpunk, disasters like Cyberpunk happen, and where people are mistreated as they make games because they have to crunch for big reveal trailers and demos, and then once the game is announced, they have a release window, and suddenly everyone's tied to that release window, and blah 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 blah. They can't. The fact that people can't be more open, that the video game industry as a whole can't be more open, just creates this horrible culture where like fans can't be told about anything pre-release with the expectation that like maybe it won't happen or maybe it'll change, because they've become so accustomed to these marketing beats where when something is announced, it definitely has to happen. So nobody can accept the fact that like maybe something is amorphous, maybe something isn't going to happen the way that it should. And it's just created this terrible culture is the short of it. But to answer your original question, I mean, yes, I always think very hard before talking about anything or announcing anything or getting into any sort of leaks that people send my way.
Yeah. Did you read the Sid Meier memoir?
I did.
That's kind of an interesting case. Yeah, it was a really interesting book. But I love that section where he talked about the legendary dinosaur game, which was kind of this moment in his career where he's like, we're going to be completely transparent. I'm going to have a blog post talking about the next dinosaur game from Sid Meier. Here we go. And then it just never quite clicked and never quite happened. And maybe that's one of those reasons that the game industry has to be more secretive, is because it requires more, miraculous twists and aha moments. Definitely. And for development to kind of gain speed. So maybe it's just the nature of the medium that we can't announce things that early.
Yeah, definitely. But I also think as a result, it's kind of chicken and the egg, but I think as a result of this culture where the games industry is so secret, it has created this expectation for fans where if something is announced, it has to happen. And I think if we kind of like pressed reset, so to speak, and like on the culture and said, okay, you know what, from now on, we're going to talk about things 4 years out, and we're going to set this expectation for fans that things are going to be changing and things aren't going to happen and things are going to get canceled. And like to kind of set that bar really low for like talking about things and transparency and discourse, I think could potentially, I mean, it would have some drawbacks for sure, but it also could potentially create a healthier culture and less of a hype cycle and less of a marketing world. But nobody would ever do that because these game companies very heavily rely on the hype cycle. And I bet they're thrilled when like they see fans say something like, how dare you spoil the announcement of The Last of Us remake before Naughty Dog could talk about it, which is so silly for so many reasons, but it's playing into what the big game publishers love to see, which is like they want to see everybody following along to their marketing beats, and they want to see every journalist like following their playbook. I
don't know if it's playing into as much as just the Venn diagram overlaps between the fans want fun announcements and also the publishers want fun announcements.
Yeah, that's true. I think that maybe their interests are aligned in that case, but the fans are kind of being played there because they want fun announcements, but like the games that result of that are like damaged for so many reasons as a result of this announcement culture. I mean, we've all heard stories about like the terrible crunch that goes into making an E3 demo, or having to hit a deadline that was announced earlier, or whatever it is. And then we've all seen like the cases where fans flip a shit because someone said something 2 years ago and then it turns out to not be the case on release. And I think that all just plays into this world where like we all are following this strict roadmap, and deviation from that is seen as a problem. You're part of the problem. But this also plays into, I mean, I could go on and on about this, but like this all plays into the culture that a lot of the press has created, where it's like, we're all friends here. Like everyone, we're all part of the video game industry. Like we're all in this together. And it's just kind of this ecosystem where every new week is about what's coming next and what's for sale next. And it's all just very unhealthy, I think.
The entire industry is unhealthy, which is kind of...
It is. I mean, that's what my new book is about for other reasons, but I do think that the entire industry is unhealthy.
Yeah. Okay, this book, Press Reset. It's been a long time coming. First question. Do you remember the old Polygon doc at the founding of Polygon, and that was called Press Reset? Did it give you pause about calling it Press Reset?
No, I didn't remember that it was called that until after I named the book.
Oh, no.
But my colleague at Bloomberg, Tom Connors, used to work for The Verge / Polygon, and he was actually produced that documentary. And we were talking about it the other day. He was like, "Oh man, like you stole my name." I was like, "Oh, that's so funny. Well, sorry about your Google results for your." I think some of my buddies at Polygon, I love Polygon, and some of my dear friends are there. I think some people there are happy to see the documentary maybe get buried a little bit in the Google results. But it was a well-produced documentary.
It was very well produced. I want to go back and watch it to see how it's aged, because I remember there were really interesting bits in there. Like, you know, just as a fan of transparency, I really love like them meeting with advertisers and stuff like that. And I was like, this is a side of the press that I've never seen, and I guess I'm in the press, you know. So there were elements that maybe haven't aged well, but.
It's funny. There's some parts where they're like, we're gonna change journalism, and those are the parts that I think haven't aged well. But all those people are amazing, and all the guys who started there's a lot of good stuff in here. I agree.
So the book, Press Reset, I read it in 2 sittings. I was a big fan for sure. It is so nice just to have this. I don't know, the video game industry in this format, just to be like every new chapter, a little bit of discovery, just to have somebody zooming in and just like, okay, let's really focus on this studio, on this studio, on this studio. Because even, you know, I've been in the industry for a while. I think I kind of have an overall idea of like high level stories here and there, but there's still so many things to learn. I mean, both of your books now are just packed full of tidbits. So congratulations. The goal for this book, I mean, did it really start with this industry is unhealthy? How can we look at just how to make studios more sustainable? Is that the high level idea here?
So it started with a completely other thing, and then it kind of veered directions. It went through the kind of classic video game story of it getting rebooted after a year in development. But yeah, no, at a certain point I was thinking about stories that are worth telling. And I was thinking about questions that I would want to ask. And I think that fundamentally, like, the best stories come from is like a good question. And with my first book, I set out Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. The question that I started with was, why are video games so hard to make? Like, why do game developers always talk about how it's miraculous for games to be made? And I tried to answer that question through case studies in that book. With this book, I wanted to ask a little bit of a darker question and a little bit of a more pressing question, which is, why is the video game industry unable to maintain a healthy atmosphere for its workers? Why do workers burn out in the video game industry? Why do so many people find it so hard to have a sustainable career in games? And from there, I kind of asked, okay, why don't I focus on game studios shutting down and what happened after that? And I figured there were enough stories of game studios shutting down and the kind of behind the scenes and the drama and the backstories behind them. There was enough interesting stuff there that I figured I could dive into that. And then from there, I also said, well, okay, I don't want this to be a book that's just like one downer ending after another. And so I decided I wanted to also follow some of the people who went through these shutdowns and try to figure out how they recovered from them. So the questions that I asked are like, what happens to a person when their studio shuts down? How do they feel about it? And then how do they move on? What do they do next? And so I found some stories that are, I think, some pretty great stories of recovery in the book as well. And so I wanted to just explore a variety of different angles. Like for some people, maybe they bounce back and create a successful indie game. They go independent. For other people, maybe they just keep bouncing around from AAA studio to AAA studio. For other people, maybe they leave the games industry entirely. And then what I really wanted to do was say, okay, here are the problems. Here are the solutions. And so I dedicated a chapter in the book to exploring potential answers for the questions that I raise and potential solutions for the volatility and for making the video game industry a more healthy place to work.
And it seems like if there is a conclusion, you can tell me if there's a conclusion in your mind, but it seems like, hey, maybe the best option for creators would be that kind of hive mind core creative force and then outsourcing for other stuff, which, Oddworld Soulstorm recently is a good example of that. The results, I think it's doing okay. But do you think that is the most likely solution, or the biggest conclusion you come to in the book is like, maybe the industry should try this a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely one potential option. I don't think it would work for everybody, but it could definitely work. One of the other, I talk about unionization in the book, and that feels to me like a must. Another thing that I explored, it was actually very timely because I pretty much was, as I was finishing the book, suddenly we started hearing about something called COVID-19. And one of the things that I was exploring in the book was remote work. And this past year has shown us that remote work is actually pretty viable for most people, for most companies. And I think just exploring remote work as a possibility is another way to make things more viable. Because at the end of the day, I don't think there's any way to prevent a game studio from running out of money if it makes poor decisions or has a flop or whatever else. A game studio could always run out of money no matter how many. No matter what, a game studio can always run out of money. All it takes is one bad decision. But if I'm working for a game studio and I live in Boston, the worst possible outcome isn't just that I lose my job, because people lose their jobs all the time. We make it work. The worst possible outcome is that I lose my job, and the only way to keep working in games is to have to move 3,000 miles away to Los Angeles if I want to keep working, because there are no other game studios in Boston. And I think for game companies to just be able to say, hey, even though you live in Boston and we're mostly in California, you can work for us anyway and just work for us remotely. That would change a lot of things and make the entire industry more accommodating towards people and prevent people from burning out to a large extent. So that's definitely one big solution, I think, to the overall problem that we explore here.
Yeah. You want to talk about the process of just kind of narrowing down the vignettes, the stories that you're telling in the book? I'd imagine it starts with just a huge Google Doc of possible stories, and then this one's this one's a little bit stronger than this one. How many fell through? What didn't you pull off for this book for a vignette or chapter?
Yeah, sure. So I had actually started with 38 studios. That was the first one that I wanted to do because I knew it was the most dramatic, well, not most interesting, but it was one of the more dramatic stories in the video game industry's modern history. And then I looked around and I said, well, okay, Irrational, that's an obvious big one, because not a lot of game studios shut down a year after making one of the most acclaimed games. So that was another wild story. And then other ones just kind of came up over the course of my reporting. As I was talking to people, I heard about their stories. Mythic was one I didn't know much about until I started researching it for this book. Big Huge Games obviously followed from looking into 38 studios, and that one I was really excited to tell because I don't think that a lot of people know anything about Big Huge Games. To this day, when Kingdoms of Amalur was re-released, people thought it was 38 studios, a 38 studios game. People talk about it as if it's a 38 studios game. So yeah, and then yes, I had a couple that I thought I might do, but then kind of cut for space for various reasons. I thought I was going to do a whole chapter about Telltale games, but wound up not wanting to do that because for a couple of reasons. One of which being, the main one being that the story was actually pretty well told through articles later. Megan Farugamesh at The Verge did some good reporting on that. My former colleague Ethan Gatch at Kotaku did some good reporting on Telltale. And I had talked to a few Telltale people, and I included their stories towards the end of the book, but decided not to turn it into a whole chapter. And then I mentioned, I was looking into potentially doing a story a chapter about Cliff Blazinski's studio, Boss Key.
Oh, interesting.
But decided not to. And he actually is writing a memoir, so I'm sure he'll include his own version of that story in there. And yeah, I mean, I kind of saw more and more game studios shut down over the course of like while I was writing the book and while I was reporting the book. And it's just like, man, this is dismal. This is a depressing landscape. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, and the same thing happened with the first book. For the most part, I was just like, okay, these are the stories I want to tell. Let me find a way to tell them. And like I had a feeling that I was writing about Irrational, and I had a feeling that Ken Levine, who was the head of Irrational, would not want to talk to me for this book, and he did not. But I found enough people who were willing to talk that it wasn't too tough to put that chapter together. So for the most part, with both of the books I've done so far, what I had from the beginning was kind of like the outline of what actually the outline I had at the beginning was what actually came.
Yeah, it seems like it is interesting just going through the book. It's like, okay, surprisingly, so many of these roads lead back to BioShock. And maybe it's just because like, a lot of the people, I guess, are kind of East Coast, and an East Coast game development, it just seems like BioShock was such a megaton that somehow everybody's connected to it in a way.
The way I structure the book, and I think people find this interesting, is that the first kind of half of the book is all the lineage of War Inspector and Immersive Sims.
Right.
And it's kind of like start from War Inspector at the top and then branches after that. And then the second half of the book is a little bit more focused on the lineage of MMOs and what kind of happened from there. I think people will enjoy it. I think that one of the pieces of feedback I've gotten from a lot of people is that people really enjoy all the connective tissues through the chapters.
Right.
Because one of the things I did with my first book was I kept every chapter pretty autonomous. Like I wanted you to be able to pick up the book and just read to any chapter, skip to any chapter, and just enjoy the story as kind of a short story. With this book, I approached it a little bit differently, and it's more like it's still kind of autonomous, but it's more like you want to start from the beginning and read through this whole book because it really tells one overarching industry story. And actually, a little bit of breaking news for you here is I'm currently in the process of like putting together what I want my third book to be.
Megaton world exclusive.
Yeah. Well, so if I were in the video game industry, I would not even be saying I was working on a third. I would refuse to comment on a third book. But I think for the third book, I really want to do one big story.
Oh, interesting.
And rather than vignettes, rather than go through a bunch of different companies or games or whatever. So, and
you mean by one big story, like even further seamlessly interconnected, or just like this is the story of one developer's life or something like that?
This is one story of one topic. I'll leave it at that for now, just because things are still coming together. I don't even have a contract signed yet, so I'll leave it at that for now. And who knows, things might change. But yeah, I'll once I have specific commitments, then I'll be able to get a little more open about what that book. Yeah. So TBD.
Gotcha. The BioShock.
But let's talk about press reset. Let's not talk about my next book. We're not commenting on that.
Yeah. Marketing 101. Here we go, Mr. Schreier. The Ken Levine stuff, I think, is maybe the most striking part of the new book. Not the most glamorous view of his leadership. Not necessarily talking about him as a person, but I mean, it was interesting that there's that one section where you talk about like, yeah, Kurt Schilling, and say what you will about 38 Studios, but like a lot of people that work for him said that he was actually a really good boss. Whereas Ken Levine, genius, no doubt, visionary, but as a boss, as a manager, as a team leader, left a little to be desired.
The flip side of that, by the way, is that Kurt Schilling might have been nice on the outside, but was like behind the scenes secretly destroying everything.
Right.
But yes, yeah, definitely. And this is no secret. I mean, I think if you read some stories online about BioShock Infinite's development, you'll see a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely some striking anecdotes and quotes and stories. And some people who left just like felt like that was a really like unpleasant environment to be in. And I mean, I think that like it's a very common thing in any creative industry, this idea of like the auteur who has this creative vision and everybody has to abide by their vision, usually his vision. And in some ways that can be a really good thing. And like, it can be really useful to have a single creative vision. But when that person is constantly changing their mind or like unable to articulate that vision and maybe also yells at people and can like get really high stress and intense and verbally abrasive. I think that can be a really stressful environment for a lot of.
Yeah, I felt like you could write an entire book. Maybe this is the topic for your next book. Maybe they're a little bit redundant, but I mean, just the difference in style from a Ken Levine and a Rod Ferguson. Rod Ferguson, obviously from Gears, who then was brought on to help ship BioShock Infinite. I mean, that is one of my favorite little sagas in the video game industry, is just like those two minds being put under the same roof to try and get BioShock Infinite out the door. It's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, and this idea that it's Rod Ferguson was brought in to be kind of the closer of the project and to get the project out of the door. And people told me that Rod Ferguson knew how to kind of translate what Ken Levine was saying and like kind of communicate that to other people.
Yeah.
And Rod Ferguson also was a guy who came in and put together a schedule and said, hey, we have this much time left. Everybody has to work 6-day weeks. Like we're crunching hard. We're working 80-hour weeks now to get this out the door. And which like that, I mean, that's a brutal part of this industry and a brutal part of what happened there. And yeah, that's how they finished that game that a lot of people didn't think would ever actually be finished.
Yeah. I feel like maybe I need to go back and reread it, but I feel like your book kind of leaves it a little bit ambiguous about the end of Irrational. I mean, do you think it is Ken Levine's choice to have hundreds of people lose their jobs by shutting down Irrational?
Yeah, well, so the kind of the way that Ken Levine has told it, and he said this in an interview a couple of years after Irrational shut down, he said he went to 2K, he said, or Take-Two, he said, I want to do something else. Yeah. They said, okay. And he said he thought that they would keep Irrational around, but that's not what happened. That's how Ken Levine tells it.
Sure.
And there are all sorts of versions of the story that kind of have trickled down to people at Irrational. Some people believe it was him. And then also the kind of contradictory point there is that in 2014, when he actually shut down the studio, he took responsibility for it. And he was like, I will be winding down the studio. So yeah, kind of mixed messages there. It's not 100% clear who decided what happened there. I think that one thing that is clear is that it was like Take-Two saw it as more expensive, more damaging to them to let Ken Levine leave than they would to just give him infinite budget. I mean, this is 7 years ago now, and they still haven't announced anything of his new thing. Yeah. So they saw it as more potentially damaging to their stock to let him leave than to just like pay him whatever he wanted and let him go off somewhere and do his own thing for years and years on.
But it's so bizarre. I mean, why not just find some other talent within Irrational to run Irrational and then create the new offshoot that Ken Levine can run?
Well, so I think if you look at Take-Two's history as a publisher, this is the company that is propelled to success from GTA and Rockstar, the Hauser brothers who ran Rockstar. And they also, they're a very auteur-driven company. Like if you look at Hangar 13, for example, they started that studio as like a single person directing this studio. First it was going to be Rod Ferguson, then it turned into Hayden Blackman, who went on to direct Mafia 3, and they're very much a company culture that's very much like, we want to find the auteur and put them in charge of things. And I think that's why, I mean, I think they see someone like Ken Levine and they think, okay, if we let him go to EA, then our stock will lose 10% on our stock, and who knows what'll happen. But and I think just they put so much value into this like person who's revered by the press and gets all these headlines and is seen as this creative force. And yeah, I mean, it makes sense from their perspective. And I guess their perspective was also like Irrational is the Ken Levine studio, and it has this identity that is like, this is the Ken Levine studio. So of course they can't exist without Ken Levine, because it's not the Ken Levine studio anymore. And what's the point? And then I'm sure they also have their bean counter saying like, this game cost us X amount and only made Y amount and blah, blah, blah. At a certain point, critical acclaim is only good for so much. And BioShock Infinite's critical acclaim was kind of like walked back later anyway.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting one. What are your thoughts on the new BioShock? I mean, it kind of seems like the opposite of what you're saying earlier where they did get out and announce, hey, we're making a new BioShock. Bug us about it later. So
yeah,
that's
which
kind of
is
positive.
Smart. That's the best way. That's like the ideal way to approach this stuff. Like if you're, I don't know, if you're Insomniac, you just say, okay, we're going off to make Spider-Man 2. Leave us alone. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
Or if you're whoever else, you say, okay, we're working on a new IP. We're doing something new. Leave us alone to work on
Starfield or even like Elder Scrolls 6. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a better way to approach this stuff in general. And then you still have the big surprise impact. Like you still have the big E3 moment where you show your trailer and everyone's like, oh my God, like people are still frothing at them out for Starfield, even though everyone has known about it for years. Anyway, so yeah, the new BioShock, that's a smart approach. I see that you're trying to, again, get headlines out of me.
Hey man, you're looking in and you're seeing the matrix in my brain, but maybe that's not correct. I just want to talk about it.
I love it. No, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, that game has gone through, every BioShock game goes through development hell, as this book pinpoints, and the new one is no exception. That went through various phases. It was in development at Certain Affinity, the Austin-based company, for a while, and then it was moved to San Francisco, where they started this kind of top secret studio named Parkside that would later become Cloud Chamber, and they're working on it now. And I'm sure it's going through all sorts of trouble, and I'm sure we'll see it in 4 years or whatever.
Yeah. Do you know if Certain Affinity stuff has been fully scrapped?
I don't know. I mean, whenever people come, well, so the writer on that game, Corey May, was actually in Austin and then moved to San Francisco. So he's still on it. So I'm sure his ideas are still in the game. But
and
like,
this is the Assassin's Creed original writer and stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, yep. Whenever a game is moved, there's never, like, people are always like, oh, are they keeping what's there? But like, I think just even ego alone is like, if you're a new studio and you're starting a new thing, you want to do your own thing. And so much of that stuff would get changed over the course of game development anyway. Like stuff that happens at the beginning of the project is almost never like gonna be the same as what it is 3 years later. So I doubt that anything there will be salvaged. It's sort of like when people talk about Star Wars 1313 and they're like, will that game be revived? It's like, it's such a silly question, because even if Lucas were to come out with a game called Star Wars 1313, it would be nothing like what we saw, because that game was made by a group of people who aren't together anymore, and like any game by a new group of people is going to be a completely new thing. So yeah, who knows what's going on over there. But they do have a fair number of people who like are experienced BioShock people who worked on like Scott Sinclair, who I mentioned in the book, who's a longtime artist and art director at Irrational. He's working on a new one. A few other people who are just like longtime BioShock people are involved with that project.
Yeah. And the studio head is from Firaxis, right? I forget her name exactly.
I don't remember who it was, but I remember they made a whole big thing. God, this is so messed up. 2K put out this press release that was like, our first female studio head, completely ignoring the fact that with 2K Marin, one of the studios that I cover in my book, had a female studio head, Alyssa Finley. And yeah, it pissed off a lot of people when 2K did that.
Right. It just goes back to the idea of 2K Marin was never quite highlighted, and 2K Australia studio is always just kind of like, not exactly the auteur-driven studio, to get back to your point.
Yeah. And something I talk about in the book a little bit is this idea of identity, and a game company having an identity or not having an identity, and how that can kind of play into the ultimate fate of some of these companies. 2K Marin is a sad story, because it's just like, it was never even seen by the company as like a studio. It was just seen as like a label, like a cog in the machine. And so, yeah, when they disappeared, when that studio shut down, 2K wouldn't even acknowledge that it was a shutdown. They just said like staff reduction.
Yeah.
At 2K. Yeah,
it's brutal. Okay. I'm not fishing for a scoop.
Fish. I mean, it's part of the job.
You don't have to say what it is, but I'm just wondering, do you know the setting of the new BioShock right now?
I've heard a couple of things, but not like, I know anything I say, like we talked about before, because of this whole brand thing. I can't even say something that like is I only 50% know to be true, or like that is speculative. So like I wouldn't even say, like I heard from a couple, like one person, that this is a thing, but I can't share it because everybody will take it as gospel, and I haven't gone through the proper channels of confirming and reaching out for comments. So
right, everything's still Schrodinger's cat when it comes to, you know, people giving hints and ideas of what's going on early with the game's development.
Exactly. But also, like, I wouldn't want to run something, like I wouldn't run something on Bloomberg without having multiple, like 2 sources at least. And so
right.
I can't share something on a MinnMax podcast.
Of course you can. No one's asking you to, Jason. I'm curious, what do you get DMs about more than people would think? What are people telling you maybe that you wouldn't expect from the outside of your reporting? What type of things?
What are people telling me?
Yeah, do you get a lot of developers?
Industry?
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have a lot of people from like QA messaging you, be like, by the way, this game exists? Like, what's not specifics, but just in general, what do people tell you more than you expect for just the flavor of info?
No, actually, I mean, what people tell me is pretty much what you would expect, which is most of the time when game developers are coming to me, it's about a project that is going through hell, or a game company that is mistreating people. I think that the thing that is sad is that I get more people coming to me than I could possibly ever share. Like, there are more stories coming to me than I would ever have the time to tell and bandwidth to go through. And I try to sometimes like pass people, like tell people like, hey, I don't have the bandwidth for this one, but maybe you should contact Kotaku and
sure
this person. But yeah, no, I mean, it's not like, the thing about games and like unannounced stuff is that it's not like I have people regularly like texting me or whatever, messaging me being like, hey, we're working on Elder Scrolls 7 or whatever.
Yeah.
Except for Ubisoft people do that a lot. Ubisoft people love talking about unannounced projects.
Maybe it's just because there's so many developers on those projects that's just sheer numbers.
I think it's something in the culture there that they just love talking about what they're working on. I don't know. It's just because there are other companies that have that have thousands of developers that don't have the same sort of leakiness to it. But that's besides the point. The point is that like I'm not actively seeking out, and people are not actively coming to me being like, here's some unannounced games we're doing. It's just that over the course of other reporting, I sometimes happen to hear things, and then sometimes I feel the need to report them, or like I hear about something and then it's there's a rumor that pops up online, and I can be like, oh yeah, okay, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I think that like part of this is kind of the net effect of me just spending most of my days on the phone with people, and something I try to do as a reporter, and I think is really good to be doing as any reporter, is just talking to people constantly, and just like constantly scheduling, like even if someone reaches out, a game developer reaches out and they have a story to tell, and I'm like not sure if it would be something that I would actually turn into an article. Mm-hmm. I always tell them that, but I say, hey, let's get on the phone anyway and just chat. And I just really like hearing people's stories and talking to people, and I think that's one of the reasons that I kind of got into this business and I'm a reporter in the first place, is because I just really enjoy hearing people's stories. And I think that's just like good practice for any reporter, is to just be constantly like getting on the phone with people and trying to, like, every single week I at least have 1 or 2 calls scheduled on any given week. And I think that's really important. And then over the course of those conversations, sometimes like things will come up, or I'll get curious about something and be like, oh, so what do you hear about this person doing this? So yeah, sometimes that's how the unannounced stuff will come to me, but it's not like people at Rockstar are like DMing me every day and be like, oh man, GTA 6 is doing this time.
Right.
And sometimes people who like I talk to for regularly about all sorts of stuff will be like, oh, I'm not going to tell you unannounced details of this game. Like, I don't want to do that. Which I totally get and totally respect. And I think that's a totally healthy way to do things, is that like, if you are a person who talks to a reporter regularly about all sorts of other stuff, or like industry gossip or whatever else, you don't necessarily want details of your own game out there. And so, yeah, I mean, to answer your original question, I do not get a ton of just like juicy gossip in my text messages every day.
Yeah, it's nice that you're staying informed, talking to folks. Do you ever feel like you should be doing more with that? I mean, are you recording all the conversations? I know these are different levels of secrecy, but do you ever think about like, oh man, at some point, I feel like I should be surfacing more of this content if the developer or the source is okay with it.
Yeah, well, usually it is for stories. Usually it's like, okay, I'm working on this Sony story. I'm going to spend the next 3 weeks like scheduling calls with Sony people.
Yeah.
Usually it's for a specific purpose. It's only occasionally, like only some of the time, maybe like 80% of the time it's for a specific story. 20% of the time it's to catch up with someone or because someone reached out and said they want to talk about something. But usually it's for stories. It's not just like for fun all day. Otherwise my bosses might get like, wait, what? You're not working? You're just talking to people all day?
Yeah.
Yeah, but usually it's for stories.
Okay, gotcha. Which company do you think you've had the biggest impact on? Or what has been the biggest impact in the industry, you think, from your career so far?
I don't know. I don't think any company would admit that they had an impact, like that my reporting had an impact on them. I think that like oftentimes, I mean, I'm just kind of like a conduit a lot of the time for other people's messages, other people's stories, and other people's complaints sometimes. And if you look at like Rockstar, for example, which I think is a good example of a company that seems to be actively looking to change its ways for the better, which I think is really cool. That is a company that like I'm sure that it helped to have a big feature story on Kotaku that's like that talked to close to 100 people there and told anecdotes and stories about how tough it was to work there and their culture of crunch and bro culture and frat boy culture and so on and so on. But these were all things that like the company was well aware of. Like all the people who were in charge of the company have known about this for years. And it's also the type of thing where like people had been working internally and talking internally. And so sometimes a public article will expedite that stuff and help lead to changes. Because sometimes you need the public eye to like really get sometimes the bosses won't care until something is out in the open. And I think that's really important and the reporter's job to do. But like, I don't really take responsibility for something like that. Like if you look at Rockstar, I mean, internally, they have all these committees and meetings and people talking about like, here's who is a problem manager and this is why this person can't be here anymore. And here's the culture that we need to fix and here's what we need to do and blah, 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 blah. And like, I will certainly say that like reporting and publicly talking about this helps guide that along, helps make things move faster. But ultimately, it's the employees who deserve all the credit for helping change their own culture and their own company. And like that, it's kind of like a prelim unionization movement, which would be the employees actually banding together and saying, hey, we are organizing and these are the things we want and we want a voice at the table. But even just like having that stuff, even being able to accomplish some of that stuff without unionization, I think all credit still belongs to the employees and the people who are working there who can actually change their culture. The outside voice, the outside lens can help spotlight what's wrong, but it's not going to change it. Like the change needs to come from the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. You've had a really interesting transition just editorially recently going over to Bloomberg, where it seemed like with Kotaku, your pieces could be quite long. And it seems like at Bloomberg, your pieces can be a little bit shorter maybe than some, gamers would want and expect. Do you want to talk about just that transition from your point of view, how it has helped change your writing overall?
Yeah, I'm definitely writing for a very different audience now. And I think that like when I read the Reddit comments, they are sometimes not thrilled about that.
Right.
Yeah, it's different world writing for, and I've learned a lot and love it. But it's a different world writing for mainstream audiences and a lot of details that I think. So my editor, who I work with, is not a video game player at all, and I am regularly teaching my editors about this world, this weird industry that we know and cover, and that can be really useful because I have to talk about a story in a way that is like palatable for everybody, which I think is a really good skill to hone. And I think the gaming culture can be very insular, and we as game reporters can sometimes talk in a language that is just impenetrable for normal people. And so it can be really useful to like be talking it through with someone who doesn't know this stuff at all and trying to explain to them, here's why this matters, here's what the context is. If you look at that Sony story, for example, the Sony story I published a few weeks ago, I think that like originally I had just heard about some of the VASG stuff, And I was like, a lot of people have been wondering in the gaming world, like about the secret San Diego studio that Sony has. People have been theorizing it's a new Uncharted, blah, blah, blah. And my editors were like, yeah, so what? Like, who cares? And it's so interesting because I think that like a Kotaku story could have been just about VASG, but for Bloomberg, it needed to be more of a bigger picture look. And so I started doing more reporting and incorporating some other stuff there. But like a Kotaku story, I think we could have justified a story by saying a lot of people have been curious about this for 3 years now, and there have been rumors that it was a new Uncharted. But for a mainstream audience, like they don't care about Reset era rumors, and so it's a really different way of approaching reporting. And I'm really enjoying the challenges and skills that I'm learning, and definitely some learning. Definitely some like things that I want to do better. Like I wasn't super thrilled about how much I had to cut. Well, so the Cyberpunk story I had to cut a bunch out of, but that we had to kind of rush up for a variety of reasons. I think we could have handled that better. Like I could have handled that better for a variety of ways. But circumstances were very different than that. But like, yeah, in general, I mean, I think that like I've been able to publish we've definitely been able to publish some longer stuff. Like for Business Week magazine, we did a huge story a few months ago about Ubisoft's culture and all the sexual misconduct and harassment there. So yeah, we can definitely do some longer stuff. But yeah, I mean, some of the details that I think would be interesting to gamers and to hardcore gamers, we don't really just care about at Bloomberg, which I think is it's been an interesting challenge.
Wouldn't they care about the numbers? I mean, surely there's some way to have some bonus thing, even if it's just like, I don't know. I know it's more writing and more editing, but it's just like a link at the bottom, like for an expanded version of this article, check out this. Or here's an unlisted YouTube video with me rambling into a microphone for an hour talking more about this.
Well, so something we're doing, I don't know if I'm even allowed to talk about this yet, but whatever. At some point in the near future, we might be launching a newsletter where I can get a little bit more into gaming stuff without worrying as much about the money. So we're definitely finding ways to do that sort of.
Yeah, well, that's definitely smart. Here's the thing, Jason. I think you're very good at your job. I think you're a great reporter. Being a fan of yours, there's a huge but. Throughout the years, there have just been so many times where I see you on Twitter and I just say, what are you doing? Just, you're smarter than this shit. And I know being at the center of, a tornado can be incredibly infuriating. And you just want to get out there and attack and message, blah, 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 blah. I'm just wondering how your philosophy towards Twitter, punching back, if you will, has changed over the last couple of years. What you've learned about the right level to communicate on Twitter.
I don't know. That's a good question. What do you think I should learn from Twitter?
I think you should learn, to try and keep punching up. I think there's been a couple instances, and it's like we can get bogged down with details, but there's a couple instances where it's just like, what are you doing? Why are you attacking this person?
Okay, so
it sucks so hard.
Yeah, I think that something that like I take really seriously is reporting on certain things such as work culture and crunch and harassment and stuff like that. And I think when I see people trivializing that, it like sets like the fire off in behind my eyes, and so I tend to react pretty harshly to that. But I mean, in general, I mean, we're talking about a few different things here, right? Like, so with Twitter, I think that there are certain groups of people who will go after me, have negative reactions to things that I say. And I think what I have tried to learn is like when something is worth thinking about and reacting to and saying, hey, maybe I shouldn't have done that, versus when people are just like console fanboys or like some are just like gnats to be swatted, to be blocked and ignored. And I think there have definitely been cases when I've been like, okay, a lot of people I respect are saying to me, hey, maybe you shouldn't have done that. And in that case, I have to be like, okay, yeah, there's some legitimacy here. Like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And then there are cases when it's like people are just mad at me because I criticize Sony and they have PlayStation avatars. And so I kind of block them. And
it's just tough to differentiate and learn which group is which group. Because I think people...
No, I wouldn't...
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't think people can realize how frustrating and infuriating it is to be in the situation that a lot of developers are in particular, of just constantly having people scream at them. And believe it or not, there's a lot of angry people on the internet about a lot of different things. And like you said, when it's often coming down to console fanboys, it's like, I did not think that this was still happening in this day and age, but oh my God, is it? It is so huge. And so I'd imagine that's tough to kind of filter through and figuring out, who should I listen to for feedback? When is it me not taking a punch versus me just trying to keep my sanity, because I will lose my freaking mind if I have the internet screaming at me every day.
Yeah, that's definitely it. And when you get to a certain point of notoriety or fame or whatever you want to call it, you are getting roped into this stuff every day. Like, I've had colleagues at Bloomberg who, when I like retweet them or mention them in a Twitter feed, they'll message me and be like, oh my God, like, is this what your Twitter is like every day? And I'm like, yeah, it's a blessing and a curse to like get this much attention every day. And I think that's a good thing, in that I can use that to like promote things and boost people and like help people and try to do some good. But it can also be a really negative thing. It can be draining and like mentally unhealthy to be exposed to so many people's opinions all the time. And yeah, that's a big part of it. But I do think, I mean, obviously I know what you're specifically talking about, and I won't get into specific details, but like there have been times recently when I've like regretted things and spoken to people privately and made amends, tried to make amends. And I think in general, like when I've made a mistake, said something I shouldn't, gone after someone I shouldn't, gone after something I shouldn't, and I've gotten kind of a lot of messages, both publicly and privately, being like, hey, maybe hit the brakes here, or maybe like this isn't the right battle to pick, then I try to listen to that and take it the right way. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, like I said before, the thing that really sets me off is when people don't are not quite are trying to undermine other people's stories, because I hear so many of these horrible stories from people, and when it feels like those stories, like as a person who is talking to these people and hearing their voices and hearing like how rough it is to work on a game and to be like subjected to all this misery for all sorts of reasons, it can be really tough to then see people trying to question that or downplay it. And so I think we know what we're talking about, but there's other instances too where it's just like, especially somebody who knows the power and the vitriol of the internet. There's times where it's like, Jason, you got to realize like you have a lot of power yourself in the idea of using Twitter to point that mass of angry humanity at somebody else who isn't fully deserving, maybe was a little bit hyperbolic in their thoughts on a game, stuff like that, where it's just like, why add so much hate to the internet? Yeah, I think that, I mean, well,
there's a lot.
There are many things I don't, there are many things I do regret. One thing I do not regret is saying that if someone were to compare a game to Holocaust, maybe they should hit the brakes. That's one thing I don't regret, actually. But I will say that like when you have a Twitter feed and you use it, like I have to realize, and something that I've had to realize over the years is that like once you hit a certain threshold of followers, of publicity, you can't really use Twitter the way other people use Twitter. And that is like kind of a tough thing to kind of wrap your head around, and it still is. And it's just kind of like learning to navigate that kind of the fact that like everything you say is like on this massive megaphone is certainly something that I'm still not really used to, or I'm still trying to kind of wrap my brain around. So yes, definitely. And I definitely think there's a lot to be learned there. And it's a fascinating subject.
It is, for sure. Yeah. So you think you're getting better, or slowing your roll every once in a while, being more aware of the power that you can have here.
Yeah, there are definitely things that I've typed out and then deleted.
I'd hope so.
in recent months and years. And I think like something that I've been trying to do is like, if I want to give a take on something that might be insulting or negative or whatever, I'll sometimes type it out and then just sit on it and like wait an hour and then come back to it and say like, do I really need to say this? And I think just trying to like other than the reporting on these companies, I think trying to avoid being too negative in general is a good mentality. I know that's your mentality in general, but like oftentimes even something as basic as like if I play a game and I'm not a fan of it, I don't really feel like I need to broadcast that unless it's like something I'm writing and I'm writing a criticism of it,
Right.
which is totally fine. But if I were to just play, like, oh, this game kind of sucks, like maybe I don't necessarily need to tweet my thoughts on every single thing that I see or play or whatever. And then same thing goes with like one thing I've been trying not to do, making like a very very encouraged habit of not doing is critiquing other gaming outlets. Like that's something that I'm trying very hard not to do. I've been trying this year to be like, I'm not going to do this anymore. Like it's not necessary. I don't think it's necessary unless it's like something that is so far out there that like I need to say something, that it's just something that I want to get out of the habit of doing. In general, I just don't think it's productive or useful, and I'm trying to hold myself to that standard. Yeah.
Do you think you'd ever want to write a book about the games press?
No, who would read that?
I think it's interesting.
that would be like 20 people would read a book about the games press.
Yeah, maybe that's true. So in reporting for Press Reset, there's so many tidbits. I know this was years ago probably for you, but do you have a favorite little tidbit that you learned along the way? Like, oh, I never knew this aspect, or I didn't appreciate this.
That's a good question. I mean, there's some things I don't want to like spoil the book, even though it's all things that happened. I don't want to spoil the stories for people who are just like learning some of the stuff for the first time. What is a favorite tidbit?
I have a couple weird ones, maybe just to...
Yeah, give me yours.
I mean, I think I had heard this before, but like the idea that Warren Spector pitched an Epic Donald is still really interesting to me. I would love if that pitch deck ever got out there. It sounds so wild.
One of my favorites in that chapter, which opens the book, the Warren Spector chapter. In fact, actually, starting April 20th, so I don't know when this is running, but starting Tuesday, April 20th, anyone who pre-orders the book can actually go read that first chapter right now. So go pre-order Press Reset at whatever bookstore you want, and then go to the official like Grand Central Publishing website for Press Reset, and you just fill out a form and show like a screenshot that you pre-order the book, and they'll send you a PDF of the first chapter and the prologue to the book. But anyway, so one of my favorite anecdotes is in that chapter, which is that in the middle of a meeting with Disney, suddenly Warren Spector throws like someone an executive from Disney is like talking to him. They're all pissed off at each other. The executive picks up the phone in the middle of a meeting. Warren Spector throws a remote pointer thing, like the TV pointer, at the wall like next to him, and just storms out of the room, and everyone's just like, do we keep going or what? And that story was pretty remarkable to hear about.
Just the idea of Warren Spector seemingly, just a sweet older gentleman. It's like, I know, it turns out everybody, especially working within a corporation like Disney, can be driven to the point of insanity.
Yep.
Oh my God. There's little stuff that stood out to me too. Like, I didn't know, we talked to Zach Mumbach here at MinnMax a while ago, but he's a big part of the book, and it's really a fascinating chapter, fascinating story for that guy overall. But
yes, I loved your interview with him. Yep.
Oh, thank you. Was a part of you like, oh man, this is kind of stepping on some reveals from the book? Not that it was full of, reveals or anything. But okay.
No, I've learned not to worry about that sort of thing. With the first book, I learned that like it doesn't really matter because people just want a good story, and like it doesn't matter if they've heard parts of it before or like know some of it. I think people are just like looking for a really good story and looking to be informed and entertained and hopefully have something resonate with them.
Yeah, it turns out a book is a much more enjoyable way to experience that, I think, than even podcasting in a lot of ways. But no, the idea that Visceral was working different. But the Visceral was working on an open world pirate game I thought was really interesting. Mm-hmm. Like in a pre-Skull and Bones world, like EA was going to take a stab at the open world pirate genre, which is cool.
Yeah, that was pre that like went through a few different forms and then eventually turned into Ragtag, the Star Wars project. But yeah, Star Wars games at EA have been cursed.
Yeah, for sure. Which is why it's nice that somebody other than EA is making a KOTOR remake.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay.
It's this is public at this point. I mean, I basically confirmed that Aspire, which is the company that has ported a bunch of KOTOR games, is working on a remake. So there's your headline, Ben. People will have to listen all the way to the end of it.
The full sandwich bookend. Cool. Jason, congratulations on the book. I hope you're feeling good about this one.
I am. Yeah, I'm excited for people to read it. I think I've learned a lot since writing the first book, and like I think tried to take a lot of those lessons into this second book. And I'm really happy with how it came out. And I think that like it's kind of bleak, but it's also kind of bright and leaves on some optimism. And I think that like it establishes that things can be changed and people can change things, and you need to kind of read and learn history, and hopefully that'll lead to some changes. And I'm really proud of it, and I think that I hope people will enjoy it. I think they will.
Yeah. What do you think? Is it sustainable for you to keep a book rolling every 2 to 3 years? Does that seem doable?
It depends. It depends what else I'm doing, but so far I've enjoyed it. This one I had to write while also having a baby, which was another fun challenge. But thank God I would not have been able to finish this, I don't think, if it had been a little bit later, because like I finished most of it before the pandemic started. And I think I wrote most of it in a coffee shop, which is like where I do some of my best writing work, is just like unplugging, like going and sitting in the corner of a coffee shop. There's a place called Atiz on 2nd Avenue in Manhattan, 2nd Avenue and was it 83rd, 82nd? I sat there in the corner for a couple months and just like same seat every day, order the same thing, and just wrote. And to not be able to do that during the pandemic, like would have made it difficult. Not to mention having a baby crawling around in the apartment. But yeah, no, I don't think it's like, yes, I think I'm hoping to write another book that comes out in a couple of years as well. So we'll see. We'll see if it's a sustainable way of doing things.
Yeah, we'll see. Cool. Well, congratulations again, and thanks for swinging by. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben. This was a pleasure.
Oh, that's very sweet. And thank you so much for watching or listening to this interview. You can subscribe to MinnMax's YouTube channel or check out our other interviews as well. All right, thanks so much, everybody. Bye. If you are sick of snark, clickbait, and an avalanche of movie news, you can help support independent games media by subscribing to MinnMax's YouTube channel here or checking out the benefits over on Patreon. It's a nice, clean handshake. You support us, and we won't make dumb, condescending stuff for you. Your support helps us continue our mission of focusing on games, friends, and getting better. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. We'd appreciate it.